name is Steven Nisbet. Welcome to this video about accompanying hymns and songs. I've been a church organist for almost 60 years and I believe that accompanying hymns and songs is the most important task that a church organist has. However, it's probably the most complex job that the organist has, irrespective of the demands of the voluntaries played before and after the service or the demands of improvisation during the service. So why is accompanying hymns and songs a complex job? Well, it's because there's a number of many different elements involved. There are the elements associated with the hymn itself. There's the words of the hymn, the melody, the harmony, the tempo and rhythm, and then there are the environmental factors like the acoustics of the church and the involvement of the congregation. So let's start with the hymn and the words. The author of the hymn has written a set of words which either are a message which is an expression of praise or prayer, a biblical narrative, a biblical interpretation or reflection on the significance of a Bible passage or a religious experience, or it could be a proclamation of a theological point. So it's important for the organist to be aware of the words of each hymn and play them accordingly. Clearly the hymn, Praise My Soul, the King of Heaven, has to be played brightly and confidently. So that's going to be different to the way you play When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, which has to be played in a more subdued and reflective manner. Further, the organist has to be aware of the words of each verse. So in Praise My Soul, there's a verse that says, Father, like he tends and spares us. So it's got to be played more reflectively than the opening bright verse. Now let's talk about the melody. Now the melody is designed to be a vehicle to carry the words. So the melody has to be very clear to the congregation, play it with clear stops on the organ, pick a suitable tempo and don't vary it. The organist should lead the singing. Personally, I don't like having a singer belt out the hymn or song at the front with a microphone. That discourages the congregation from singing. Now number 3 is the harmony. The composer has written a melody with a definite harmonic structure, so it's important for the organist to be able to play the harmony accurately. Only occasionally should the harmony be altered by the organist. Now, in the hymn Praise My Soul, the King of Heaven, there are 4 different harmonies provided in the hymn book because they are there to match the words. So in verses 1 and 5, we've got very bright tone. In Father, like he tends and spares us, we have it more subdued. The harmony for verse 2 is a very conventional harmony that suits the singing of a choir with soprano, alto, tenors and bass. And then other hymns, they give themselves to reharmonizations, and there are lots around. Composers like Eric Tiemann have written reharmonizations, and Noel Rawthorne. Personally, I like those of Eric Tiemann, and I like reharmonizing last verses myself. So here's my reharmonization for Tell Out My Soul. So number 4 now, there's the tempo and rhythm of a hymn. Good hymn singing can be sabotaged by slow tempo or an unsteady rhythm. So hymns like Love Divine or Love's Excelling, they need to be played brightly and got to have a bright and rhythmical accompaniment. And then there's the African hymn, God Sends Us His Spirit. That's got a very joyous feeling, and that needs to be expressed with a lively tempo. Reflective hymns like The Lord's My Shepherd. They can't be hurried, but they can't be played like a dirge either. Another lovely hymn that can't be hurried is My Song is Love Unknown. Discuss the spirit or mood of the hymn. The motto of the Royal School of Church Music is, I will sing with the spirit and with the understanding also, which is a quote from 1 Corinthians 14, chapter 14, verse 15. I propose an organist version for this quote, I will play with spirit and with understanding. The organist needs to be able to express the spirit of each hymn, ranging from the stirring hymn such as Crown Him with Many Crowns, and then you need to be able to adapt to have a more reflective hymn played with that sort of a spirit. An upper room did our Lord prepare. Forthright hymn like Forth in Your Name, O God. It's got to be played with a very bold feeling. Remember to play the hymn so that the congregation can sing and make music with all your heart, which is a quote from Ephesians 5, verse 19. Now, what are the environmental factors that impact on your hymn playing? Firstly, there's the acoustics of the church. If the church has a long reverberation time, you have to play with a more detached technique, otherwise the sound gets muddy. You have to play a little slower as well. Now there's the involvement of the congregation. They're the important players in this exercise, but don't let the congregation drag the tempo back. You take the lead as the organist and again play with a detached technique at the start of the hymn in case they're dragging. That way you can set the tempo. As the congregation keeps up with your tempo, you don't have to be so detached. Now there's quite a few practical issues, more practical issues in fact, these are all very practical. And the first one is the playover. That's what you play to introduce the hymn at the beginning. So the playover has to let the congregation know what the melody is, how it starts, and how fast it's going to be sung. So you make sure it includes the first line of music. My usual playover consists of the first two lines of the hymn, played mezzo forte, followed by the last line played a bit louder. Congregations don't need the whole verse to be played. So here's my introduction, say, for Forth in Your Name. this pattern. For instance, you need to vary it for the tune Elacombe. For Elacombe, I play the last half of the tune so that I avoid needless repetition. But most importantly, it's the last line which tells the congregation how the tune goes. So here's Elacombe, which is often the tune for "We Limit Not the Truth of God." You need to plan the playover for each hymn and do that as part of your preparation before the service. Another practical issue is breathing. The congregation needs to breathe while they're singing, so you have to phrase the music according to the words. Insert a tiny break between phrases to assist them to breathe. Also need to breathe between verses, so insert a period of about a second between the last note and the start of the first note of the next verse. Now, registration is another important practical issue. That's about selecting stops. So clarity is the key here with selecting stops. The principle of diapason chorus is the foundation of good hymn accompaniment. So you need to use 4-foot and 2-foot stops as well as the 8-foot stops to allow the congregation to hear the melody clearly. If you only play on 8-foot stops, that's the pitch that they're singing at and they can't hear the melody above that. So add the 4-foot and 2-foot stops so that have that clarity. So here's with 4-foot and 2-foot stops with the tune Regent Square. And you can also hear that there's a good foundation in the pedals. So the bass line is very clear and it needs to be there to provide support for the singing. Now, if the organ that you play has few pedal stops, maybe it's only got a sole Borden 16-foot stop on the pedals, so you need to add the great to pedal coupler to boost the bass sound. And if you don't play the pedals at all and you've got a digital organ, you could use the bass coupler. Many digital organs have a bass coupler which couples the bass notes in your left hand down to the pedals. The next issue about planning your stops is that you need to have stop changes between verses because you need to maintain musical interest. After the first verse, maybe you could take off the 2-foot stop or the mixture stop. So here's an example with Regent Square. Stops like the Nazard 2 2/3 or some soft reeds like the oboe, and that can add character to the sound as well. The Flutes Chorus. The Flute Chorus 8, 4 and 2, that can be used in contrast to the principal chorus. So if I've got the hymn "I'll Praise My Maker," you might start with the diapason chorus, but then for another verse you could go and have a flute chorus. And that's a nice contrast. And then, of course, if you've got mixtures on the organ, you can add them for brilliance for the first and final verses. Gives clarity to the melody and helps the congregation as they are singing. Now, one word of advice as to what not to do: don't use the tremulon or the vibrato on the organ, because that affects the clarity of the melody and it confuses the congregation. And also, don't vary the volume with the expression pedal. Don't have your right foot glued to that swell pedal, because continual variation of the volume is also confusing for the singers. Now, when you get to the final verse of a triumphant hymn, we need to have a rousing conclusion. So you can add the reeds and mixtures. It might sound like this. I also have a small ritenuto at the end of the hymn, the last couple of bars, just slow it down a little bit to come to a nice conclusion. Now, I mentioned before about reharmonizations. A reharmonization for the last verse can really top it off, and if you've got a descant, that can add the icing on the cake. So I played my reharmonization for Tell Out My Soul. That's one that I think is really a good one that does finish a hymn very well. I've written a lot of reharmonizations, and I've published a book called Creative Last Verses, and it's got 156 reharmonizations in it. Contact me if you're interested in looking at that. Now, the next practical point is accuracy. It's an important matter with playing hymns. Nothing grates more to a musician than hearing a hymn played with the wrong notes, or varying the tempo, or not having any spirit in it. So I would cringe if a Bible reader stumbled over familiar Bible verses, or changed some of the words, or mispronounced some of the words. So as a musician, I would cringe hearing wrong notes or important notes left out. Open fifths are particularly jarring in hymns. The key to greater accuracy in playing hymns is practice. Every week in preparation for services, I practice the hymns as well as the voluntaries. And with the hymns, I practice the playover, I practice the stop changes and the phrasing as well as the notes. There's an old joke about a tourist wandering around New York City who asked a local, "How do I get to Carnegie Hall?" And of course the answer was, practice, practice, practice. So best wishes for your hymn playing, my colleague organists. I hope you find it a rewarding an experience just as I do.